Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
From sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome everyone to another episode of Recover You. Today we are starting a 4-part series called Daily Tools to Live a Life in Recovery. And we are specifically talking about the addict in recovery for this 4-part series. And so, Patrick?
Yes.
Take it away.
Part 1.
Take it away. Yeah.
Part
so
uno.
One we're going to talk about, well, the first thing we wanted to mention was the first step is we're assuming that that it's out in the open. Mm-hmm. That's part 1 of recovery.
Yeah.
So we weren't going to spend too much time on that because we're assuming, first of all, if you're listening to this, that you've probably already been found out or discovered or confessed or whatever. If that's not the case and you're listening to this podcast because you want to learn how to get into recovery, go talk to someone, make sure your spouse knows, reach out to somebody, a support group. That's going to be step number 1. But we're sort of starting this 4-part series, assuming that the addiction is already out in the open. And we're just going to walk through some tools that Patrick has found to be very helpful. And I will say I have noticed as a betrayed spouse are really impactful tools as well. So today we're going to talk about blockers, the faster scale, and the feelings wheel.
Awesome.
Feelings. We're going to talk about our feelings.
Feelings. Yeah. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
No, we should do that. So, the thing to remember is whether you've been discovered or whether you've just finally got fed up with your behavior and you're going to take action, you're actually on your way to your first group or whatever that may be. To your point, the thing to recognize is that your behavior is a decades, years long pattern that has been etched into your brain. And so if you go from that's why you can't just stop. That's why maybe you've engaged in a binge purge cycle or whatever that may be. But you have to, one of the best analogies I ever had was it's like a high-speed train going down a train track. That is what your addictive behavior is. And you have to get to a point where you stop that train, you allow the weeds and the trees to overgrow those tracks and send that train down a healthy side. So it's hard. It's very hard. And
what's that thing called when they pull the lever and the tracks shift to the other?
The switch.
It's a switch. It's a switch.
Yeah. Yep.
Track switch.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do. And imagine that the switch is all rusted and it takes a lot of effort. It's going to take intentionality. Maybe it takes some help,
Mm-hmm.
It takes, it's very on purpose that people have to pull that thing really hard and then go to the other track.
So here's a tangent, but I really, really like trains. And so when trains go over train tracks, if you ever look at a train track that's used very frequently, it's shiny on top. But if trains stop going down that track, it doesn't take very long for that track top to start to rust.
Right.
And so, just
this is the great analogy. A
train geek analogy that goes with that. That's what you want to do. It doesn't take long for those tracks to start to rust and things like that, but you can't send the train down it. So what we're going to talk about is how do we get to the point where we hopefully are not sending that train down that track.
And everything that we're talking about in the next 4 parts, these are super, super basic tools that anyone can do. They're free. You can do them at home. You don't have to have a special system or anything. We're going to kind of walk through a bunch of different things. Actually, I think I said they're free. We're going to talk about some things that cost a little bit, like blockers and things like that. But most of this is very low cost, free. Anyone can do it. And a lot of this is also pieces of what the Conquer program that we've talked a lot about includes and is inspired by and things like that. And so, of course, we're always going to encourage you to do this in a community, but we just want to break down some of the tools. Maybe you're in an SA group. Maybe you're in a different type of support group. Maybe you're in, some other type of support right now, some other type of community, and these tools can still be really, really helpful for you. And so what we wanted to do with this 4 parts is just really bring you tangible, actionable things that help you flip the train switch, that help you change the tracks, that pattern interrupt, that, do all of these things that kind of help you get onto the recovery trajectory.
Right. Right. So the first one, and which is very, very important, is blockers. And so these are blockers on your devices that will prevent you from going to the places that led you to acting out. So they could be, you could shut down the internet entirely. So like in our case, no internet on the phone, no longer a personal laptop, gone, right? So that in effect is a blocker, right? So I can't engage in the behaviors that I used to engage in.
So one thing to think about there is, what is the pattern of activity?
Mm-hmm.
So if it is like on your phone, then it's going to be most important on your phone. If it's on your phone and then sometimes on your laptop, you're going to want to make sure that you address both. And also be like really honest through this process. Like, what's your mentality? Like, know thyself, right? If you're somebody that looks for loopholes, if you're somebody that goes, well, if it's not on my phone, I'm going to go on my smart TV, right? Like, there's basically any piece of technology. If you think there's a potential there, you're going to want to.
Right.
But if you're someone that's just like, no, it was literally like always on my phone, and I really, really want to be in recovery, then, it may just be fine to do something on your phone.
Yeah, that's right. So there is a difference. There's blockers, and then there's accountability software. So blockers are either settings on your phone or other devices or whatever programs that just flat out prevent you from going there. Sometimes a lot of work systems will have, they'll restrict YouTube, or they won't allow you to go to Netflix at all. Like, you just can't go there. That's a good example of a blocker.
Like in your business, you mean, like
right,
at your workplace?
Right. Yeah. A accountability software would be a device that, let's say you needed to get to YouTube for work, and it was something you had to have access to, but it was part of your acting out pattern. Mm-hmm. Accountability software takes pictures or lists activity and sends it to somebody you have deemed as an accountability partner. So the accountability partner can pull up your report and go, that's not really what he said he was going to be doing. And you can reach out and say, hey, I'm seeing some suspicious activity, or I'm seeing something that's creating an issue, or whatever. And so that's the nice thing with accountability, because if you think about it, the blockers just, if you don't have an accountability partner, it just prevents you. So like in our case, what we didn't want to do was do accountability stuff, because we didn't want you to get triggered. And
I didn't want to see the emails with the names of the websites and stuff like that. Right. And to be clear, as someone that coaches betrayed partners, we do not recommend that the betrayed partner, that the spouse is ever, if you have an accountability app, the betrayed partner should not be the accountability. So she's not getting these triggering emails and stuff. Yeah. Hopefully there are no triggering emails, but the idea is, let's set it up for both of you to be successful in emotional recovery.
And there are some cases, and that's really important, because there are some cases where accountability software will have some false flags. And that's what's really important for your accountability partner and you to kind of work through. So I'm actually the accountability partner for somebody, and there was something that kind of came up that indicated a high risk thing. He and I talked. He's like, no, nothing's happening. You okay? Yeah, I'm good. And then it was just fine. Versus had it been his wife, it might have been a very difficult conversation that night, descent back down the trust ladder, all of these different things. It was easier for me to manage that with him than it would have been for his spouse. Now, the one difference is, in our case, I can't get to anything on Safari. You hold the password to that. So that's not.
Yeah. So I guess, that would be accountability in the sense that's more of a blocker, not like you were clarifying the difference there. So if it's a blocking thing and it's just parental controls, which is what we use on the phone, we found that to be the most helpful. We have iPhones. I'm sure there's something similar on Android, but the parental controls can be utilized in a way that's just for us very effective. And so all that took is that I hold a password, and when we need to download a new app or update apps or whatever, I just put in that password. And otherwise, that stuff is just not accessible on the phone. Like, he can't access the internet or anything like that. So we took more of a blocking approach, but like, I'm not an accountability partner in terms of like, I'm not getting notifications from your phone about anything at all.
Yeah. And there's, there's certain things that, you can put parental controls on things like Disney Plus. You can put parental controls, I believe, on like things like Netflix and things like that.
App if it's on TV, your phone or laptop.
Yeah, and it usually calls for a password or something like that you can do. One thing that I did discover is there's a lot of gaming platforms, and I guess gaming platforms used to be really good about having parental controls, but I guess recently in the last couple of years or so, that has kind of gone away. And I had, and this is where it comes into how serious are you about recovery. I had a gentleman in one of my programs who sold his PlayStation, and just said, you know what, I can't do it, because he had found that it was something that kept tripping him up. And so he sold it and he got rid of it. And, I'm sure it was sad for him in a little bit, because he probably liked the game, but it was a source that he couldn't
manage.
Manage correctly. So he said, okay, I gotta get rid of this. So
I almost guarantee you that 1,000 hearts just warmed listening to that comment, that someone was willing to give up a gaming station for their sobriety. But I mean, that's what it takes.
Yeah, right.
So we do want to mention with blockers and accountability apps and stuff like this, these are just barriers to entry.
Mm-hmm.
They just they just give you the opportunity to slow down the potential, right? Like we were talking about the train tracks. If your regular pattern has to do with, well, I wake up in the morning and I have this totally subconscious pattern of, I click up my phone and then I see this and then I do this and then, here I am. Having the blockers on there basically is just a barrier to entry. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. We realize that if anyone listening is like a super IT tech guru, whatever, that these are things that can be bypassed. But for the majority of people that want to be in recovery and that are not tech gurus, these are very, very, very helpful. The second piece of this, though, is that it's demonstrative immediately of like, I want to recover. And it also immediately begins demonstrating action, if you are married, that your partner is saying like, okay, you're doing these things that are hopefully putting barriers to entry and slowing the process down, and like you're taking it seriously.
Yeah, I often, because of my military background, I like to use the term, you're defending in depth. And so, you get triggered, you're new in the process, maybe you haven't fully healed, you want to go there, you go to your phone and it blocks the site. And then, so you're just trying to have enough depth to slow you down, to, possibly say, okay, I'm going to call I was thinking of calling my accountability partner. I was going to go act out. I couldn't get into the phone. All right, I need to step back and go call so defense in depth is always a really, really important thing. So you can Google things like porn blockers, just Google porn blocker, and all kinds of different websites will come up. There's some that are good for Android, some that are good for iPhone, some that are good for laptops. I think there's, I don't know if it's still out there, but I think even certain Wi-Fi routers, like if you have stuff in the house, it doesn't work if you go off, but Wi-Fi routers will restrict content as well. And you can work with those and set those things up as well. So there's a lot of really good avenues. Are they all 100% perfect? Probably not. I think short of getting rid of access, period.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But, ultimately we've talked about this. Ultimately, you want to get to a point many years down the road, 2 to 5 years later, where you are healed and you live in the world and you make good decisions. Now, it is still a good idea, I think, in this age, because the way marketing works and the way things are geared towards people on social media and things like that.
This is like a light in some ways, depending on the level at which you start it at, whether you're a total blocker or total blocking access or whatever, depending on like how intense the security lockdown is at the beginning.
Yeah.
Let's say it's a more of a minor sort of like basic blocker or whatever. That's like a lifetime thing. That's just part of living, like saying, I don't want to be exposed to things that are going to be triggering either to myself or to my partner.
Right.
And so that's just a good awareness of technology. And this is something, if you have kids in the house, like these things should probably be on their devices anyway. If you have a smart television, these are things that should be on the TV anyway. So on some level, the most basic level, like this is just protecting, your family and yourself and your spouse.
Right. So a lot of great ones out there. Experiment, kind of figure it out, see what works for you.
If you're on like, what's like a high security level statement? I don't know, but like if you're on like the most locked down of locked down, then what you were mentioning is that might progress a little bit over time. So that then it's just making better decisions. But
maybe you went to a flip phone, right? And then you decided at some point, okay, I think we can go back to an iPhone. But then each one you have to have the discussion.
Yeah. So then a couple that we like is Canopy.com.
Canopy.
That's a blocker.
Canopy is a blocker and accountability. I think you can set
can
it
do
up.
both.
Yeah, you can do that. Covenant Eyes is a big name out there. You hear that a lot. I think they have changed. It used to be opaque images. I think they've changed that now. So I think it does something different.
I will be really, really honest. As a betrayed partner, I don't, my personal preference, I don't love the accountability stuff, because generally what the accountability stuff means is complete and total access, no blocking. You just get listed websites, you get opaque pictures, or you get pictures or whatever. Like, I don't love that for either person, really.
I don't think it has to be. I think you can, there could be like,
there are certain levels.
Gateway stuff. You're like, hey, I know this isn't necessarily pornography you're looking at, but what is this? Right? Like, it could be, it could be that like halfway, I don't know,
what?
like
with
well, like if you went to shop for a swimsuit, you could do that. That's not going to be blocked on pornography, right?
on either one, you're saying blockers or accountability apps.
Yeah, so like that would be a good example where an accountability piece would go well, because it's like, hey, what's going on here? Because no blocking software will probably block just a swimsuit thing.
To be honest, though, if you go to the parental control situation on the phones, there are certain websites that you can block. There may even be in certain situations keywords. So actually, if that is an issue where people go, I'm going to, well, I don't know what you would call that, pushing if that's a slip, or if for somebody that might be a relapse, or someone knows like, hey, I push the boundaries or whatever. And these are the types of ways that I like to do that, or have done that in the past. There may be certain types of situations where you actually put those keywords in to be blocked.
Right.
Like for the searches too.
Yeah. That's a good point. But anyway, so I think the point is there's a lot of stuff out there. Work with it. Be honest about it. Do what's right for you. Understanding. I always kind of feel this way too, that like, at least for that first 90 days, try to go as severe as you can by locking things down, deleting things, putting,
throwing the gaming system away.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe that first 90 days, an alternative thing is you go give it to your parents. Hey, hang on to this for 90 days. And I'm going to review it again in 90. Just get it out of your house. Like,
changing patterns in any way, in any capacity is going to be helpful, right? So like, you would take if it's on a laptop and the laptop was in one room, put it on the kitchen island where it's, even if you have a blocker on it, right? Break all of the patterns, thinking through like what the patterns were and changing them. It's all going to be helpful.
Right. Okay. All right. The next thing is something that's called the FASTER scale. Now, the FASTER scale, FASTER is a acronym. So it actually stands for something, which I'll go through. But a lot of times what happens, if you think about the reason that you're in this behavior, any sort of coping behavior, is because you don't want to feel the full range of your emotions. So what the FASTER scale does for you is it allows you to check in daily or hourly or at whatever interval. I actually always use daily, but it allows you to check in and say, hey, how am I feeling right now? And so the whole premise behind the FASTER scales is it's a top to bottom scale. So at the very top of the scale is restoration. And that's where you're being open and honest and you're engaging in healthy behaviors. And at the very bottom of it, which is the R, is relapse. So you're back to doing those behaviors that you never thought you would do. And you've bottomed out and all of these different things. So what generally happens is over the course of a period of time, and it could be as long as 2 weeks, you're going to descend down that scale. So let's say you come out of your first Conquer group and you feel really great, and you're like, I'm never going to do this again. I'm starting to feel healing, and you're a day into your journey, right? Well, the next day, your wife is very triggered. She's finding more things. You start to get a little bit anxious as to what's happening. So you start to descend down that scale. So basically, it's just what I used to do is I would journal in the morning, and then I would grab the FASTER scale and I'd say, over the last 24 hours, what have I experienced? What are the emotions I have experienced? It allowed me to check in.
So it's not like right in this very moment how I'm feeling. It's the past 24 hours. So
that's how I used it.
So that's a couple different things that you could even check off.
Right.
If you had a couple different things happen.
Yep. And so one of the things that happens in the Conquer group is when you check in on a weekly basis, you say, what's the lowest you went on the FASTER scale this week? So you talk about that. You actually absolutely talk about those things. So let me kind of run through what the steps are and describe them a little bit on the FASTER scale. So I talked about restoration at the very top. That's not an F. It's not real FASTER scale. It's just restoration.
Freedom, healing.
It's a no current secrets, keeping commitments, making eye contact, being open and honest, true accountability, You're identifying your own fears and feelings. So that's restoration. So the first one is forgetting priorities. So that's the F in the faster scale. So you start believing the present circumstances and moving away from trusting God. There's denial. Maybe there's flight, like you're an avoidant personality. Maybe you run away. You get into a tough situation. You go down to the basement like very quickly. That's the F in faster scale. Change in what's important. Maybe you're starting to keep some secrets. Conversations a little bit more superficial. This is a big one. Maybe you're starting to be a little bit more preoccupied with the TV, your phone. Again, you're spending more time on those types of things, right? So it's forgetting priorities.
Less connection with human beings.
Right. Less connection. Maybe there's some secrets in there, that sort of thing. Forgetting priorities will then lead to anxiety. It's a growing background noise back there, undefined fear, getting energy from emotions. Maybe there's worry. Maybe there's using more profanity. Maybe there's being fearful. And it's funny, I spent a lot of my time in anxiety. There was a lot of worry. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of those types of things. Old negative thoughts, maybe perfectionism. That was one thing that you'll see in addicts when they recover is they will, and we talked about some of my own behaviors through recovery, like I'm going to write you notes every day. I'm going to do all this kind of love bombing. Love bombing is a little bit of a perfectionist type of thing. Okay, I'm going to make this grand sweeping gesture, but you're anxious. You're not really honest with what you're doing. So you're living in a lot of anxiety. You could be mind reading. So do you know what I'm talking about there? So mind reading is like, well, I know Kylene just wants to leave me, or I know Kylene's just,
you're assuming you know what the other person thinks.
Right. So that's that.
And then behaving based on it. So another way to say that, I think that would be really good just for people to think about is telling yourself stories.
Right. Yeah.
So
maybe a lot of resentment.
You're making up a lot of stories about what's happening around you, but maybe you haven't had a conversation with that person about what's actually going on.
Absolutely. So then what happens is you've got all this anxiety, it's building, all this worry and fear is building in you, and then you want to try to outrun it. So then the S in faster scale is now speeding up. So you're trying to outrun the anxiety. So what happens then a lot of times is now you'll speed up. So you're going to get up early, you're going to go work out, you're going to go do this, you're going to go do that, you're going to do dishes, you can't sit still. You're running fast, you're running around, you're maybe overspending.
So I actually
mood swings,
see
like that.
What was that one? Speed up.
Speeding up.
I'm call it faster on the faster scale.
Yeah.
The speeding up. That is, I think, actually a really, really common one because what it is it's a form of avoidance, and most addicts are avoidant attachment, and so it's a form of kind of what you were just talking about. It's like, if I'm busy all the time, if I fill my time, even if it's with beneficial stuff like doing the laundry or doing the dishes or whatever, if I fill my time with stuff, guess what you don't have time to do? Sit in your feelings.
Right.
So what it's really subconsciously doing is if I'm busy, I don't have to feel anxiety, or I don't have to have this hard conversation, or I don't have to remember that I acted out this morning, or I don't have to deal with the bad thing that happened last week.
My wife wants to talk about this, but I have to be too busy.
I'm
going to change the oil. I have to, yeah. And so like you want to run away from that. And a lot of times it's overworking. So a lot of times that's what'll happen is people get to overworking. You'll see them. Well, this is the time where, I'm going to read, entire books of the Bible. That's a little bit of like overworking because that's not really sustainable when you're like living, unless you're a priest.
It's a little bit of spiritual bypassing,
right? Which
is in episode 23, I think.
Wow.
No, I was just listening to that today.
Okay, so we're going to call you on that. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, because I just sent that episode to someone. So, but what we mean by that, so all of this, if you're noticing, is avoidant. It's all avoidant behavior. It's all stuff that I don't know how to process my emotions. So then I feel really uncomfortable. These are uncomfortable feelings. Well, when I feel uncomfortable enough or too uncomfortable, I'm going to start getting super avoidant and I'm going to busy myself. And when I'm super busy, then I don't have to think about it or feel it. And so what happens is we think, and humans do this a lot, we find these coping mechanisms where we think, hey, I'm managing this pretty well, everything's going to be fine. But what's happening is because the emotion is still there, because it hasn't been sufficiently validated and worked through and processed and released and removed and dealt with, it's still in there. Now you're just busier, and now everything is just being pushed down. And when it's pushed down, it eventually explodes. And that's how you're going to get to the faster scale, essentially predicting relapse.
Right. Yeah. So the next one, the T in faster scale, is ticked off. So generally, if you think about it this way, so you've developed anxiety, you've sped up to outrun your anxiety, and you started working really, really hard. Maybe you're doing things, and then people don't recognize how hard you're working. So that makes you mad. And so, you end up getting mad. And this is because you've kind of lost perspective at this point. So maybe you're getting an adrenaline high on anger and aggression. Maybe you are overreacting, road rage, constant resentments, pushing other people away, maybe increasing isolation. We talk a lot of times about the difference between solitude and isolation. Prayer and journaling and, spending time in thought, meditating, that's solitude. Isolating is constantly in the middle of hard things, you go off by yourself. Maybe you don't take phone calls, maybe whatever that may be from friends. That's isolating. And so there is a difference there. One is you can argue
solitude,
healthy.
You could say, is self-reflection.
Right.
Isolation is, I'm really struggling, but I'm not asking for help.
That's right. So, needing to be right, digestive problems, headaches, those types of things. You can't forgive, you're feeling superior. Maybe you intimidate people as well in that speeding up. You're
so all
angry.
of this, what I'm hearing as you're describing this, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into self-protective defense mechanisms.
Right.
Because it is a complete lack of having a healthy coping mechanism. So anytime you choose something other than a healthy coping mechanism or healthy emotional processing way to deal with something that's uncomfortable, it's just going to get stuffed down, and it manifests later. And as you're going down the list, the coping mechanisms get worse. Basically, like, these are much more, by the time, if you're in T, your spouse is going to be super irritated because you're being a pain around the house and you're irritated all the time. And like, what the heck is going on? But another way to think about this is, you're trying to get into sobriety. So what do you think your body's going to do when it suddenly has to go cold turkey from all of these dopamine hits? It's going to really try hard to find other ways to get the dopamine hits. So if you're struggling and you're not finding connection, you're not finding community, you're not finding healthy ways to get your emotions expressed, then that dopamine hit can very easily come out in a burst of anger and the adrenaline rush and all of this kind of stuff because of the frustration. Or you can be, like you were mentioning earlier, be trying to stay in sobriety, you're missing the dopamine hits, you're trying to do nice things for your spouse, maybe very sincerely, but in a little bit of a love bombing way. You're trying to like repay the debt. You're trying to help, her see how hard you're trying. And she's over here like, okay, I'm still watching because not enough time has passed. So I'm not going to, be like, oh, yay, you did something nice for me today. You know what I mean? Like, we can acknowledge without, overly praising, right? And maybe what you were looking for was the dopamine hit of excessive praise for like this basic thing, right? And so after you've wounded her so badly. And so all of this can just cause this intense spiral, which is why, the connection, the community, and the healthy processing is so important, because if you don't have that, this is almost the inevitable pattern that's going to happen.
Yeah. So after all of that, you get into the E of the faster scale, which is exhausted. So you have been ticked off, you have been full of anxiety, you've been speeding up and all those things, and you get to where you're exhausted. So you're depressed, you're panicked, you're confused, you're hopeless. I hear people will say this, I'm just hopeless. Like I feel like this fight is hopeless, and things like that. So I'll you can't cope, you're tired. Maybe you're thinking about using sex, drugs, or alcohol. You're seeking old, unhealthy people or places. You're starting to kind of seek out and maybe on the periphery or bouncing around some of the behavior that you used to do, but you're definitely dancing with it. Maybe not full on acting out in it, but you're there. You're like, picking up your phone, maybe typing something and deleting it, closing it. You're like right there. So that's exhausted.
Is like a hair sugar away from I quit.
Yeah, right. So then, of course, the final thing is relapse. And that's where you go to the place you swore you'd never go again. You give up, you give in. Maybe you feel like I deserve this or whatever. Things have been really hard. You're out of control. You're lost in your addiction. You're lying to yourself. The result is the reinforcement of shame, guilt, and condemnation, and feelings of abandonment and being alone. So you're gonna relapse, and then all of those deep emotions that tell you that you're a bad person and that you've ruined things and that you'll never beat it, and all of those things are going to well up in a massive response to what just happened. So once again, faster scale. It's forgetting priorities, anxiety, speeding up, ticked off, exhausted, relapse. And so if you think about faster written from F at top, R to the bottom, what's going to happen in the way I've heard this described is that as you descend, you don't want to go, like if you're in speeding up, you don't want to go back up to anxiety. You want to get back up to restoration. And the only way that you do that is you get off the faster scale. You don't want to go back up it or anything like that. So the way you get off it is you got to engage in pattern interrupt. So pattern interrupt in a very healthy way is to reach out to one of the people in your groups or go talk to somebody who's safe. Go, say, hey, this is how I'm feeling right now. Help me through this. And so that's what's really, really important. And that kind of, I'd heard this say that you have to address the double bind. And so double bind is a concept that we can talk about, but it's a choice between maybe two hard things.
You're between the rock and a hard place.
Yeah, between a rock and a hard place. And there's a double bind that needs to be addressed in your behavior, in your thought process, or in something that's happening.
Maybe we should talk about that really quickly, because I think when you hear like between a rock and a hard place, sometimes it's like, oh, there's no good option. Sometimes the double bind, there is a very clear right option and a very clear wrong option. But the reason it's difficult for the addict is because both cause pain.
Right. Yeah. So here's a good example of a double bind. So double bind would be, let's say you broke a boundary with your wife, right? You absolutely broke a boundary. And there's no way that she can find out. There's no verifiable way for her to check it, to figure it out. There's no data pattern. There's no expenditure. There's nothing. There's no cameras. There's nothing. You can't find. So she had asked you to tell her, right? So that is...
Or not even asked you to tell her. You had an agreement and you broke it.
Right. Yeah,
so you don't even need the extra, hey, I asked you to tell me. It's like, we agreed that you would do this and you haven't. Right. So let's just put...
So the double bind comes in as you need to go tell her, and there could be consequences, and there could be hurt feelings, and there could be arguments and whatever. The other side is you lose your integrity. And so they're both hard things. And so clearly the easier right is if you broke the boundary, go talk about it. That's it, because you don't want to lose your integrity. By stepping up and kind of saying things, you gain your integrity. But it's a hard choice. So that's a clear example of a double bind. So, these faster scales are effective, and we didn't create this. Actually, I think it was originally created by Michael Dye, who had created the Genesis process, which was kind of one of the precursors of a lot of these programs. Okay. Yeah. And so, but it's in the Conquer series. 7 Pillars uses it in a lot of their Pure Desire programs and different things like that. And so really the intent is checking in daily on how you are feeling.
What, so we can put that, you can Google faster scale. I think
absolutely, yeah.
I think you can find it fairly easy, but we can also put the link in the show notes. Do you remember the app that you were kind of testing out for a little period of time?
It's called Freedom Fight.
Freedom Fight, yeah. That have a faster scale in it.
It did, yeah. And actually, the Freedom Fight app is really neat because you can set up a group of people. For some reason, I can never get mine to fully work, but you can set up a group where everybody's seeing your daily check-ins and where you are so if you're in a group of 5 people and everybody gets up in the morning and boom, does it, and it goes out and people can see it. And I think mine might not work.
So that actually is a great suggestion for people, because let's say you have 3 people that are kind of on an accountability team. You fill out the faster scale in the app. If someone sees that you're low, it's always your responsibility to reach out for help, but you can also, your friends can be proactive. If they see that before you had a chance to reach out, they can reach out and support you as well and go, hey man, what's going on? So there's just an extra layer there, whether it's that app or some other version of that you create yourself. But these are all ways to sort of make sure that you're in community and utilize this as a signal for you to be in community.
Right. Yeah. So I think once again, from a process standpoint, what I would do is I journaled in the morning. And so as I was journaling, I would pick up my definition of the FASTER scale with all the details that I kind of read, through this discussion. And I would say, where am I? And there were times when I'd be like, oh, I've been forgetting priorities. And then later I'd be looking at it and I'd be like, oh, no, I actually had a dramatic mood swing last night. So I was actually in speeding up. Or I had 17 cups of coffee at work yesterday because that's too much caffeine. That's a speeding up behavior too. Something more than you normally do. So it was just something that I would do to check in. And if I was like, maybe I need to talk this out or something like that, I would go from there. So very, very effective tool to gauge where you are.
I think we've already said this, but if you're low on the FASTER scale, what do?
You reach out. You reach out. You reach out to, you can either go talk to your spouse, if that's a safe place to talk about that at that moment. But, your accountability partners, your group partners, maybe a safe family member who's willing to talk this out with you, that kind of understands what's going on.
Yep.
And stuff like that. And then here's the key through this, don't let people say, well, you shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing, because you feel the way you feel. And so there are ways to get better over time, but you're feeling the way you're feeling at that moment, and it is what it is.
Yeah. The point is to move through it, not to ignore it.
Yeah.
Why is the FASTER scale important? It's important for two reasons. One, in order to recover, you have to begin identifying emotions that you've been avoiding that have led to the addictive process. And then two, it actually acts as a predictor of relapse up to 2 weeks in advance, meaning when you stay low on the FASTER scale without taking action, they've seen that when you stay low, within about a 2-week period, it's almost indefinite that a relapse is going to happen because you have those really low emotions and that emotional state, and your resilience is dropped and all this kind of stuff. If you're exhausted and ticked off all the time, it's like relapse is almost inevitable. So the idea is that it's a proactive daily tool to reach out before it becomes a problem. And in that way, it can really dramatically help you interrupt the pattern where maybe you wouldn't have caught it soon enough before.
Yeah, what I like is I like the descending nature of it. So you're descending into relapse, right? And so it actually has a visual. It's like going down into a cave or a dungeon or something like that. So you want to find a way to stop that descent. And so that's what's very effective about it. And so but there's a lot of once again, if you Google FASTER scale, once again, Pure Desire has it, Genesis Process, and it's in the Conquer series.
And then the last thing we're going to talk about is the feelings wheel. We won't spend too much time on this. It's fairly self-explanatory. Just Google feelings wheel. Again, there's a million out there. You can literally buy pillow covers that have this on it. And sometimes that's helpful, if you're mad or you're sad or you need to punch something or scream into it, and you can identify your emotion first. It's kind of good. Yeah. But the feelings wheel is just a tool both for, it's very helpful for both people, the betrayer and the betrayed party, to help communicate more clearly if you're having a conversation, you're trying to share how you feel. But really, like when we're talking about tools for the addict here, one of the things is learning how to describe how you feel and learning how to identify how you feel. So if you have sensations or thoughts or feelings on a regular basis that you've never really put words to, you're just like, I'm uncomfortable. And like, so for example, we're going to talk in a couple weeks about, the acting out patterns and how to identify that and stuff like that. And so if your history has sort of been, when you're sitting here thinking about it and you're analyzing and you go, well, anytime I'd feel uncomfortable, I'd act out. Okay, well, over time, what we want to do is we want to take that word uncomfortable and we want to get way more specific. Like, were you depressed? Were you anxious? Were you feeling lonely? Right. And so having a tool like the feelings wheel can help you start to develop that vocabulary and get a little more specific and kind of pinpoint. And sometimes it's just hard, right? Like, I don't know how many words it has, like maybe a couple hundred words on it, right? Like sometimes we go, what's the word? Right? So having the resource right in front of you can just help you get that vocabulary a little bit stronger, a little bit more quickly, communicate with yourselves, but also through this process and kind of what we're talking about here with the FASTER scale is start to be more honest with yourself. Like, what is it that's actually going on? That's going to be absolutely critical through the recovery process. Actually,
as you're talking, I was thinking, I think it would be something that'd be very good in conjunction with the FASTER scale.
Right.
So sometimes, you're like, man, I'm just out of it today. I don't know what's happening. And I remember thinking that. I remember thinking like, I don't know. And the only word that would come to mind is empty. And I don't think empty is on the feelings wheel. And so I had, that would be a good example to say, okay, what is that word? And then how does it translate onto the faster scale? And do I need to do anything about it? Or do I need to just sit in it right now? And, what exactly do I need to do? So I think those two in conjunction would really kind of make you a feeling superstar in a way. But yeah, I think it'd be very effective because most of us haven't ever really talked about feelings.
Mm-hmm. Most of you men, is that true?
Most of us men, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, we talk about it all the time. Okay, so anything else about blockers, faster scale, or feelings wheel today? Okay, cool. So that was part 1 of daily tools to live a life in recovery. We hope that this was helpful. I think these are super applicable, easy to get into your daily pattern right away. We'll put some links in the show notes for sure. And then next episode, we are going to talk about two more really specific tools that you can use. Again, doing this right at home, and one specific for travel. So make sure to tune in, and we will talk to you soon. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.